I 3D printed my grandpa. This is my grandpa, Charlie Newman. Well, a statue of him. And this is my grandpa on a ketchup bottle. In this video, I'm going to show you how I turned the statue into this thing using a bit of magic called photogrammetry, and how I used a 3D printer to print all these. In high school, I sculpted this bust for art class. I gave the bust to my grandpa, but I got it back after he died. I don't have space to store it, so when I offered to give it to someone else in the family, one of my cousins was like, "You can share it with the whole family. Just use photogrammetry." And I was like, photo what? I'll get to that soon. First, let's talk about the bust. Why did it have to go? Well, it's 16 pounds or 7.26 kilograms for everyone outside the US, and I just don't have room for it. I thought maybe I could give it to a relative, so I sent out an email asking if anyone wanted it. I should mention that if you think Redshirt Jeff's a little cuckoo, you haven't met the rest of my family. One of the first email responses suggested we make copies of the statue via the magic of photogrammetry. I remembered Corridor Digital did it for some of their projects, but even they seem to have some issues with fine details like hair. Here's the basic idea. You have a 3D object, could be anything, a soccer ball, a hand, whatever. You set that object somewhere, keep it still, then use any old camera to take dozens or hundreds of pictures of it. Then you dump those pictures into a machine learning algorithm and wait a few hours and out pops a 3D model. Or so they said. I was willing to give it a try, and I figured the first step would be taking a ton of pictures of the bust. Now, as a software developer, the saying garbage in, garbage out is pretty much my mantra. So to get the best possible result, I decided to build a turntable and take hundreds of pictures with my Nikon DSLR on a white backdrop. The first step was building a turntable. I could have bought one pre-made, but they were out of stock at Lowe's, so I hacked together a turntable with 2 round boards and a Lazy Susan ring. They always say measure twice, cut once, but I got a little impatient and kinda eyeballed it, and my Lazy Susan was a little off center. But Redshirt Jeff tested it and gave it a thumbs up, so that's good enough for me. Next, I needed a way to rotate the bust in 10-degree increments. I put a strip of tape with marks every 10 degrees around the top of the Lazy Susan so I could be precise. I also had a super professional backdrop, this 40-cent sheet of poster board from Walmart. I set up my video light and put my camera on a tripod using a remote for shutter release so the camera would be rock solid. I took a series of 150 photos. First a set head-on, then slightly higher, and finally a fourth set that was looking down at about a 60-degree angle. I adjusted colors and exposure in batch in Photoshop and overexposed the white background, but I didn't do any other adjustments. I knew part of the platform would probably show up in the generated model, but I figured it'd be easier to touch it up one time in a 3D model than 150 times in individual pictures. Alright, so up until this point, I'd been working in charted waters. I've done a ton of photography, but I was brand new to photogrammetry. I sent the batch of full resolution JPEGs to my cousin, and both he and I started trying to get a 3D model out of them. Our first attempts were, well, not amazing. Regard 3D had a Mac version available, so I tried that first. I followed their online tutorial and used most of the defaults. In the end, I wound up with something resembling the statue, but it looked like it had been run through an industrial food processor. I tried some other application on my old Windows machine, but the result this time looked like it turned the statue into soggy Cool Whip. We kept failing over and over again for a couple weeks, but we didn't give up. And some people might wonder why we cared so much or why the family still emails years after our grandparents passed. That's because they were both amazing and showed us the love that ties family together. Most people don't get to know their grandparents through their childhood and even into married life, but I did. My grandpa was in the Navy in World War II. He married young and had 6 daughters, but no sons. In fact, I was told by one of my aunts that he would stop by his church after work sometimes, partly to get a little downtime before coming home to 8 high-energy women. That's right, his mother-in-law also lived at their house with them. And apparently, he'd been known to fall asleep in the church pew, and one time he was mistakenly locked in the church and had to climb out a window. Through all that, his strong Irish voice could be heard singing in his church choir, at his grandkids' weddings, or with his musically talented daughter, who carries on the tune for the rest of us today. But he did have 2 character flaws. First, he would sit in his spot at the table every meal and dunk everything, and I mean everything, in his cup of coffee. Growing up, we always used to get donuts from this place behind me, and I could never understand how my grandpa could ruin a really amazing donut like this by soaking it in a cup of coffee. But that's how he liked it. And I guess there are other people who do that too, otherwise that donut chain wouldn't be named Dunkin'. But the other flaw may be legend now in parts of Italy, and that's the man's inability to eat a meal without ketchup. I asked one of my aunts about it, and well, I'll just let her tell you the story.
So we're in Rome with Mom and Dad. Dad was 80 years old, and you know what a big Catholic he was. So we took a side trip to Assisi. Bus tour. We stopped for lunch at a beautiful banquet hall. They served us a plate with a veal in a white wine and lemon sauce. And Dad calls the waiter over as he tries to walk away. And, hey, buddy. And the guy turns around and he says, you got any ketchup? And the waiter just looked perplexed. And Dad goes, ketchup. And the poor guy just paused and said, no ketchup, and walked away. And I was just like, oh, Dad. And Dad said, that's okay. Next time, I'll bring some of those packets.
Grandpa requesting ketchup at the most inappropriate times was so common it was kind of a trope. We decided there was nothing for it but to buy him this shirt. We loved Grandpa, and we still miss him. He was a solid anchor. I just wish he were still around today, especially since his old sheet metal skills would come in handy for some of my projects. But I digress. We were talking about photogrammetry, turning hundreds of pictures into a 3D model. I was pretty close to giving up when I found this blog post from Dr. Peter Falkingham. In it, he showed a way to use open source tools to generate a model on the command line. I saw command line and I was like,
it's a Unix system. I know this.
So I installed CalMap and OpenMVS like he mentioned, and I used a slightly modified shell script that automated the process of turning all 3.6 billion pixels into a 3D model. I won't bore you with the details in this video, but I documented every single step in a blog post on my website. It's linked in the description. The main thing is these processes take hours. I let my Mac run the script overnight and look at that, a working model. The final output still had the base in it, but I opened that in Mesh Mixer and did a plane cut to get rid of it. Then I used the Make Solid tool to make the bust a solid 3D object. Now, my cousin already had a 3D printer and had used it before, so I sent him the 3D STL file and let him start printing it straight away. But I had also bought a printer, an Ender 3 V2, a few months before I started this project, but I didn't have an excuse to spend a few hours setting it up. 3D printers are a lot different than a typical desktop printer that uses paper. I set it up in my kid's schoolroom, then brought it downstairs and put it on a rolling printer cart since I knew I'd be rolling it around my workshop a lot. And that was a really good decision because just a few weeks later, a plumber had to clean out a stack and got that beautiful smelly black goo everywhere, right where I had set up the printer. Anyways, I spent a lot of time getting familiar with the printer, trying out different filaments and getting the right slicing settings to make my prints actually work. It's not as easy as I thought to get consistent, good prints. But once I was comfortable, I finally printed my grandpa. I printed him small in white first. Then I found some bronze filament, which I think I'd call a little more like dark gold, and I printed him in that. And I even had some glow-in-the-dark filament my dad had given me, so I gave that a spin. And you might be wondering how I got these really pretty time lapses. If you ever just try setting up a time-lapse camera on a 3D printer, you'll see some fairly janky results like these. But I found out about Octoprint and installed it on a Raspberry Pi attached to my printer. I also found out about Octolapse, a special time-lapse utility that connects a camera directly to Octoprint, so while the print is happening, it can trigger the camera at specific times. And so I grabbed my old Nikon D700, set it on a tripod, and went to town making high-resolution time-lapses of all my glorious 3D print jobs. Anyways, I digress again. This video isn't about 3D printing, it's about 3D printing my grandpa. If you want to find out more about how I set up my 3D printer and how I monitor it and get these Octolapse videos, check out my 3D printing repository on GitHub. It's linked in the description. So back to my grandpa. When I showed people some of the results, and my cousin showed his printer doing a multi-day giant grandpa print with marble filament, it sparked some inspiration back in the crazy family email chain. How about a keychain grandpa? Done. What about a glow-in-the-dark keychain? Sure thing. What about the biggest possible bronze version of Grandpa that I can physically print on an Ender 3? Yep, did a couple of those too. But the last thing, the pièce de résistance, is this, the ketchup bottle version. I put Grandpa into mesh mixer, then cut out a cylinder in the bottom that was the exact outside dimension of a ketchup bottle cap. I printed it, glued Grandpa to the cap, and bingo, we put Grandpa as close as physically possible to his favorite condiment. I hope he's proud of our collective achievement. Some people leave a legacy of wealth or get their family name put on the side of a building, but our Grandpa, he's forever remembered in our hearts and on every bottle of ketchup we use. My grandparents were married for 62 years with 13 grandchildren, and they got to meet 10 more great-grandchildren before they died. Their love for each other was obvious even after all those years. I had recorded this short clip when I interviewed them for a school project many years ago.
We celebrated our 50th last year, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. We were just in a state of almost being in heaven during that ceremony. Hey, are you going to leave all these asides?
He's going to edit it.
I hope so. You got to look happy.
I am happy.
Well, Grandpa always put ketchup on his ketchup, and now I can put Grandpa on my ketchup. Grandpa, you always taught me the importance of hard work and a hearty laugh. This one's for you. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling. Now I need to do a couple pictures.
You look like you're drunk.
Okay, that didn't work out.
Nope. No. What's wrong with you?
You look crazy.
Jeffrey.
Ah, shoot, I'm getting a phone call. That makes a cool waveform. Oh. That's disgusting. The pièce de résistance. I mean, I want to do it right. I don't want to diss the French people here.
This would be said pièce de résistance.
Pièce de résistance. Pardon my French, but I cannot pronounce that.